extinction. Future. A secure future for one and all.
Nothing is secure within the reality of torment. To stop us? For what purpose? What reason?
I will have what I want.
You've chosen to side chaos. This is my world, and you shall obey my order.
Hey y'all, Mac here. This is going to be my relatively brief video guide for life stacking Reliquarian, specifically playing Shock Nova of Procession. I want to preface this by saying that this is still a dissolution build, as in order to sustain the crazy amount of cast we have with the skill, we need to play dissolution in order to enable us to spend all of our life on that cast. Now with that out of the way, for those of you who are willing to play a dissolution build, I want to guarantee that this build feels pretty great. And overall, for bossing, it's fairly solid. I think it's a really good all-rounder, and it's able to clear a lot of the content that I wanted to do. I did a lot of deli mapping, I tried some Juice Breach, and it overall felt really good with the build. I think that it has some higher damage potential, but it definitely doesn't hit the ceiling as some of the crazier builds like Ward Break or K-Block and all the other endgame builds, which is why I'm swapping off of it now, but it has carried me for all of the second week of PoE. This build has been clearing content pretty easily. I've been able to do all Ubers without too much trouble. Now, that being said, I wanted to go over some of the playstyle, general mechanics, and how it's been to scale the build. Overall, the build's been difficult to scale past the, like 60 million damage range. And it's a lot of like min-maxing and potentially going like Adorn, which I thought about. But overall, I think I'm retiring the build as it stands. 60 million damage is plenty for literally everything in the game, except for maybe the crazy 100% Delirium Juice Breach, but very few people are doing that and very few builds are able to do that. So how this actual build is scaled is just through max life, and we're stacking a lot of max life and cast speed and crit and all of that, but the end all be all is max life. We have 22,000 of it, basically just holding down Shock Nova of Procession, and it is a one button build, and all you really have besides that is an Aura Link and a Frost Blink or Flame Dash or whatever other movement skill you so desire. I'm playing Frost Blink over Winery Blast because I think we have enough cast speed for it to feel okay. Now I think besides that, a lot of the issues with my last Icicle Mine build are still prevalent here, except for the max hits. I'm able to tank a lot of things that shouldn't be, tankable. Like during Exarch Slam, I've been able to tank. The Maven, do as I say, I've been able to tank, and the Comet or the Fireball from her as well. And there's a lot of things that the build can tank just because of its crazy life pool, but do note that once you've tanked that, you won't be able to cast or really do anything at all. You're just going to be chilling and trying to dodge damage so that your Dissolution can unreserve. Okay, so I wanted to go over the mechanics of Dissolution just really quick and briefly and explain why we really need to use it. So Dissolution basically causes any life that you would lose taking damage to become reserved instead of being lost, and that allows us to basically spend our entire life pool and still be safe taking damage. And this is a way around high mana costs or high life costs, which would otherwise put you in a really dangerous place to getting one shot, right? Like if I'm spending my entire life pool casting Shock Nova, because this is like a 6,000 life cost per cast, I'm going to be in danger all the time of dying. And so Dissolution just basically allows us to spend that, and we still have our 22k overall life. The downside to Dissolution is any sort of degen or anything like that will permanently cause us to lose life until we wait 2 seconds without taking damage to gain it back. I think that this is something that a lot of people really hate playing around. I got really used to it just playing the Deadeye and having tried this before, but overall I think it's a totally manageable item and playstyle, and I think that it gets a lot more hate than it really deserves. But at the same time, I can totally understand why people don't like it, so do keep in mind that this is a mandatory piece of the build to enable it to scale to the higher damage that it has. Alright, so now the question is, why Reliquarian? Well, I really want to actually just try out Reliquarian for some sort of build. I had a lot of the life stacking gear left over from my Deadeye, and I decided that Shock Nova Procession was a really cool skill. that seemed really meta, and I really wanted to try it out on an Ascendancy that may not be as popular for it. And Reliquarian turned out to be a really good choice. I'll go over the Ascendancy choices later for it. For the most part, it's a lot of quality of life and a lot of like speed more than anything else. I think it's really done well for what it is, especially if you want to roll a Scion, but it definitely isn't gonna scale to the same level as the Inquisitor in terms of damage. Alright, so next I want to get into some of the overall pieces of the build that really lets us scale the damage. So the Apostate is a body armor that basically turns all the ES that we would gain from our equipped armor pieces to maximum light. And this 1-to-1 conversion is very powerful if we're able to stack a lot of ES on our gear, and we'll also opt for some life on the prefixes of those gear pieces. More specifically, we're crafting helmet, boots, and gloves with very high ES, as well as whatever life we can get onto them. This in turn gives us a pretty crazy amount of flat life. Wrathpith, I think everybody at this point knows about this item. It gives you spell crit and spell damage based on your maximum life. I really wanted to play a lot of life stacking this league because I don't foresee this item staying the way it is, or in general life stacking staying the way it is for too much longer without getting hit by some nerfs. Another item I want to mention that's very important is Untouched Soul. So the reason why we have so many empty red sockets on our gear is because we get a certain amount of maximum life from our amulet per unsocketed red socket. Currently, we're getting 56 from the overcorrupted version. You don't have to get 56, but it's obviously going to give you more damage as well as more tankiness the more life you can get on this. I think the maximum is currently 58 to my knowledge. And yeah, it's just overall a very good alternative. I did some testing trying to match it with like a focused amulet, and overall the damage is very similar. I think Untouched Soul at max roll actually trumps over that, but obviously you're giving up all those gem links that could be allocated for other skills or setups, like maybe an AG with companionship. Besides that, all of our gloves, boots, and helmets have ES recharge, and the reason why we need so much ES recharge is because of the Eternal Youth Keystone, which basically makes us recharge life instead of ES. So all of our ES recharge is attributed to our life. This gives us close to maybe 16k life recharge, and this allows us to cast spells like crazy. The biggest issue with this build is its spell cost. It's about like 6,100 life per cast, and so having this high amount of recharge enables us to basically spam this and in turn do crazy amounts of damage. One other issue with the solution builds in general, and also just for quality of life, is ailments. Ailments and damage over time specifically is going to completely shut down dissolution builds, especially bleeding and poison. And the way we work around these is just get immunity. Storm Shroud and a Mage Blood Flask handles all the elemental ailments, except maybe Burning Ground, which you need to get through Aberrath. Desecrated Ground is just a mod you're going to have to avoid on your maps unless you want to deal with that, which I would highly recommend against. Now, to deal with poison, we have either a Mob Conquest node from the Reliquarian, or you can get a Cannot Be Poison roll on your boots through the Essence of Delirium. Another way you can deal with this is opting out of maybe a Flask Suffix and going for poison immunity. For bleed immunity, the best way I had of dealing with this is to get bleed immunity on a flask. And this also solves our corrupted blood, so we don't need to get it on one of the crazy expensive unique jewels. That being said, you could also get Cannot Be Bled on a ring, and that could be an option, but you still have to find a way to deal with corrupted blood, which usually means shelling out, 60 plus div on a unique jewel corrupt. Now, as far as defenses go, what we have mostly is a Dissolution build. So we get a recharge every 2 seconds. We don't take damage. Basically, full restoring our health. Besides this, we are also attack block capped at 80% and 71% spell block, which I think is fairly good. And I rarely die in maps that aren't, crazy juice, like super juice breaches or to uber mechanics that I am just too bad to dodge. But basically a major part of how we're scaling our damage here is Burden of Shadows plus a Rune Graft of the Witch Mark. This adds a total of 7% of our max life to our spell damage as flat damage, which is very strong and very major for our scaling since we have so much max life. And the extra cost from the Witch Mark is definitely noticeable, which is why we need so much ES recharge. Verusso's Ambition is actually fairly powerful. I think that the Ravenous Seal that it gives is really good for content like Breach or Deli maybe. Basically, it gives us 15% more damage and 15% less damage taken by the same type of mobs. Breach almost spawns exclusively demons, so if you just click one of the Breach monster corpses, you get 15% more damage towards them and 15% less damage taken. It's very good for that in that sense. Other than that, you can also take the Mob Conquest one that gives you poison immunity, but we're going to be solving poison immunity in a different way. I think that for your final points, 2 points, you can take either Astral Projector. The benefit to Astral Projector is some bosses, some of the Ubers such as Eater, or potentially Shaper, they basically will be like far away, and it might be easier for you to avoid their big slams or attacks while being far away, especially Eater. Him doing his hunger, he'll still be targetable, right? So you can basically Shock Nova him from far away and deal extra damage that way. But against bosses like Syrian Exarch, who likes to charge into melee range towards you, or like honestly even Maven, it might be better to opt out of this and to play something like Precursor's Release. So Precursor's Release is the AOL Bloodline Ascendancy node, and I think this is very powerful because we're playing Untouched Soul and we have a bunch of empty sockets. The Take Note extra damage from crits and the Cannot Be Stunned is pretty solid. I think the action speed is very major. There's a lot of stuff that slows you just randomly in maps, especially from Delirium. There's Drowning Orbs from Eater, which is really annoying. And the stun is actually fairly major because we're a block build and we also are a life build. His Annihilation on Uber Exarch is actually fairly annoying to deal with. And so taking Cannot Be Stunned really helps us not get stun locked, basically. I would highly recommend playing AOL for most purposes. I think Astral Projector mainly has its use in non-mapping scenarios and in like some Uber fights, but I am really biased against this node, even though I see a lot of people running it. The other nodes are kind of okay. You can maybe get like a Purity of Elements if you really can't solve res elsewhere, but I wouldn't really do that. Besides that, we're getting Curse Immunity from Sublime Vision. We're helping Cap block with Reckless Defenses, 2 of them, and we're playing Storm Shroud to get Elemental Ailment Immunity. And of course, the life stacking Valborn Red Dream with 7 nodes allocated, giving us 21% increased max life. Other than that, there's only really these 2 Transcendent Fleshes, and these are actually giving us a crap ton of crit multi. So we're getting a total of, 139% increased critical strike multiplier just alone from these jewels, which is really powerful. I do think that this build can be played on like Inquisitor, and it might have a higher damage ceiling, but overall it's felt fairly comfortable on Reliquarian. I do think that you have to run Dissolution with this build just because of how much life you're consuming per cast, especially with the Rune Graph, and that's kind of the downside, right? Is it's a playstyle that a lot of people seem to hate, and I completely get it. My next build is gonna definitely opt out of Dissolution, but this league I wanted to try it out. I played 2 builds now with it, and I think that it's definitely manageable, but I totally understand the downsides. I think there is a way to build around it, but you're gonna be sacrificing a lot of your ability to actually cast. You might have to sacrifice this Rune Graph, and you're just gonna be playing, honestly, a separate build. There are a couple people who are running the Shrine Belt instead of Mage Blood, and I do think that the Shrine stacking variants are possible. You can play like Acceleration, maybe Echoing. You'll have to look at how the costs change with Echoing. Acceleration, same deal. This could be an option to make the build feel better. You'll have to solve reses, you'll have to solve immunities elsewhere, but it definitely is a playable option, and I think that's a really big part of this build is that there's a lot of ways to play the build, whether it's like Astral Projector or whatever, that feels really adaptable to different boss encounters and mapping. In terms of flexibility then, the main thing that we have going for us is a gem swap for mapping that I think will make the clear feel a lot better. There is a support called Annihilation Support. Basically gives us Explodey. Unfortunately, this does not chain upon each other, but we can combine this with Boreath's End to basically get a decent amount of Explodey to feel pretty good for mapping. For Breach and for Strong Boxes and Deliorb farming, I've tested, and it feels pretty dang good for a spell that's like in a line. And the screen clear is overall okay. It's not the greatest because it doesn't, like hit behind you, but the Explode kind of takes care of some of it. Overall, I'd recommend this setup, swapping out Void Manipulation and your other unique class, usually Witchfire Brew, for that Orieth's and Annihilation support. Alright, so that about does it for the build. I wanted this to be a relatively quicker build guide. I don't want to bore everybody with the same life stacking setup as usual, but I do think that this is a really fun ascendancy to play this archetype on. And I do think in the future, there's a lot of opportunities to be able to flex this ascendancy around. Outside of life stacking, I've seen Reliquarian played with some crazy movement speed builds, such as like Toxic Rain. People basically clearing maps like Strand in like 10 seconds. It's definitely a really cool addition to the game that I really enjoy. And I don't know if they're ever planning to like swap around uniques or whatever with the ascendancies, but I do hope that they, have some fun with this and really give us some variety, as it's a really cool idea overall. And for my next build, I'm going to be taking off that Dissolution finally, and I'll be playing something that is near and dear for very personal reasons, and I do hope that it ends up being a build that I can showcase and have a lot of fun with. Originally the plan was to play something like Ward Break or something that is just OP meta that can be min-max, but I'm going to be pivoting to something that's a little bit more personally valuable to me. And of course I will preface that it is a life stacker, but it's going to be utilizing some different mechanics that will be totally fresh compared to the other life stackers that I played this league. So until then, ciao.